We also go across to some of our guests joining us. Professor Brahma Chellaney, strategic affairs expert. Amy Tarkanian is former Nevada State GOP chairwoman and Republican strategist. Tara Karta, distinguished fellow, IPCS, will be with us in just a minute. And Professor Purnendra Jain, the University of Adelaide visiting senior research fellow, ISAS, is also joining us from Adelaide. Professor Lab, why don't I begin with you? Your sense of the declaration that has been adopted and announced today, and just why this is crucial for the world.
Are you asking me or Professor Jain?
Professor Jain. Mr. Chellaney, I'll come to you in just a bit. Yes, Professor
Thank
Jain.
you very much. Yes, I have just read the joint statement, which is a big breakthrough because there were concerns where there will be a joint statement at all. So it has come out. So this is a big achievement, and they have used a language which is quite interesting in terms of that any forceful conflict or war is unacceptable. Sovereignty will be respected. So these are the words which in Indonesia last year at the G20 Summit they were trying to reach. But in Indonesia they said most member states agreed. In other words, some did not agree. But this is not the case. This statement, as I understand. So I think this is a big development and something which lots of commentators were thinking quite negatively about this. So India has done a bit of its diplomacy there with the help of countries like Brazil, South Africa, and Indonesia. We should remember that Indonesia was chair last year, and then it will pass to Brazil and then to South Africa. So I guess here also we see the global South, how the global South prevailing over the Western nations, developed nations. So they're putting their agenda ahead and they're making their interests and their views very clearly. And most Western nations would agree to this particular position that we don't need to go straight and criticize Russia on this issue. So they are using kind of indirect language and a warning to countries like China as well.
No, but the fact that that has happened in the New Delhi Leaders of States Summit, the fact that the West seems to have now agreed that they don't need to talk about the war in a certain manner and a common language has been found. Professor Brahma Chellaney, that's a big shift in the stand that the West has been taking. Do you sense a climb down from them, realizing that something needs to be done about this situation, and the stands that all sides had taken, certainly at a forum like the G20, just cannot continue anymore?
You're absolutely right, Shivani. There is a clear softening in the Western stance. After all, the war isn't going as the United States expected, because the US has been supplying Ukraine with lots of weapons. In fact, the US is running low on critical munitions because it's been supplying Ukraine with such quantities of weapons and munitions that its own stocks are depleted now. And yet, the fact is that Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russian forces hasn't gone very far. In fact, it's actually failing. And then many in the US are beginning to admit that. So given the new realities on the battlefield, there is a clear softening in the Western stance, which resulted in avoiding casting blame. For example, in Bali, the statement deplored in the strongest terms the aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine and demanded the complete and unconditional withdrawal from the territory of Ukraine. This language is missing from the New Delhi Declaration. Instead, the New Delhi Declaration has general principles of international law, such as avoiding threat or use of force, for example. It was by emphasizing general principles that the sticking point could be overcome and a forward-looking consensus document could be adopted by consensus. And I think, this is very important because this is the last G20 summit. The next summit will be a G21 summit with Brazil hosting it, and India can certainly claim credit for the leadership role it played in helping bridge the global divides on several issues. Ukraine was just one of the issues, but there were other issues
No,
on
but
which
before I move to other issues, Professor Brahma Chellaney, I do want you to expand on what could have convinced the West to come down from some of their views on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and agreeing on this language which is not condemning Russia. Is it just the realization that, okay, we need a different tactic as far as dealing with Russia is concerned, and maybe in the future bring it on the table, something that sides have been resisting so far? Or is it also that India has been able to impress upon them to some degree that something is better than nothing?
Well, Shivani, two factors have been at play. One, that the West certainly wants India to play a global leadership role. The West wanted the New Delhi summit to be a success, and therefore they had an interest in the summit adopting a consensus document. So they did want India to have a successful summit. But more importantly, there is a Ukraine fatigue in the West that is becoming apparent. For example, President Joe Biden has shut the door to diplomacy with Russia, while he's sending a stream of senior officials to Beijing to stabilize US-China relations. But the New Delhi Declaration talks about dialogue and diplomacy being important to resolve any conflict. And the West is party to this document. In other words, there's a clear softening in the Western stance. The West is now looking for ways to reach out to Moscow and begin quiet negotiations. India is well placed to broker such negotiations. And I think the G20 puts India in a strong position to play the role of a bridge builder.
And possibly work towards speaking and talking to Russia, not the stance that has been adopted till now. And could a deal of sorts be in the works, given that all countries have now come together at least to agree on the language of a joint statement at the G20?
You're asking whom, Shivani?
This is for Amy, sir. Amy, could you hear me?
No, I actually couldn't hear you until just the very end of your last sentence. I apologize.
So briefly, I'm just repeating